Have you ever seen a ghost? Well, I have. Hi, I'm Alice, and I'm here to tell you about the most terrifying moment of my life. You may not believe me at first, but trust me, this ghost thing wasn't something I just imagined. I really saw it. Hear my story and you'll see for yourself. Until a year ago, I lived a pretty perfect life. I lived with my parents in a nice house, and at school, I was really popular. I got good grades at school and was in lots of sports clubs, but then my parents gave me some really bad news that changed my whole life. You see, Mom and Dad ran a business catering for weddings, and it hadn't been going that well. In fact, it was going so badly that they ended up admitting to me that we had gone bankrupt. But the worst part was that we were forced to sell our family home and move into a completely different town. This wasn't easy to take in. Actually, I was so angry when they told me that I refused to speak to them for weeks. How could they just ruin my life like that? I had to move schools and say goodbye to all my friends. I soon stopped being angry and just felt upset and worried. 2 weeks later, I cleared everything out of my room and it was time to say goodbye to our house. I hadn't seen the new house before we arrived, as I refused to go and visit it. So when we turned up, I couldn't believe it. It really was my worst nightmare. The house was really old, with an overgrown garden. It was in the middle of nowhere, too. So my parents would have to drive me everywhere until I could save up and get a car. It wasn't just the outside that was bad, my room was too. It was in the attic and was really dark and creepy. The floorboards creaked and it smelled weird. I felt like I had walked onto the set of a horror movie. Mom and Dad just told me that they would redecorate the whole house soon, but they just needed to save up some money first. That night, I felt so upset and frightened, I lied awake in bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't believe that my parents had made me move away from my friends and school and to live in such a terrible house. Eventually, I fell asleep, but then something very spooky started happening. It's all vague now, but I remember waking up with a jump. There was a weird noise of creaking floorboards in my room. I looked to the window. There was a storm outside and it was raining. I could hear a tapping noise on the window, like there was someone outside who wanted to get in. Then I heard the noise of someone whispering. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't feel my arms. I tried to move my legs, but they were like tree trunks attached to my body. I couldn't move them. I went to open my mouth and scream, but I couldn't. I was trapped inside my own body. Then I saw something in the corner of the room. It was a dark shadow moving towards me. I didn't believe in ghosts, but what else could it be? But this couldn't be a friendly ghost. This was something evil that had paralyzed me. I squeezed my eyes shut, prayed not to die. Somehow I must have fallen back asleep. I woke up and it was daylight. I sat upright and was able to move again. The room was normal. There was no sign of any ghost, but I know that I hadn't imagined it. That day at school, I was so upset and worried, I couldn't concentrate. I hated the new school too. Everyone was already in groups of friends, and I was the outsider. The teachers weren't any better. They were so mean. One even shouted at me for not paying attention in class. But I couldn't concentrate. I was too worried thinking about my scary encounter last night. I knew I had to speak to my parents. That night, I waited up late for my parents. They had taken on new jobs working in a restaurant and were having to work really long hours, but by the time they got home, it was really dark. When they got in, I sat them down and told them that last night a ghost had visited me and paralyzed me in my sleep. They quietly listened to my story, then I couldn't believe how they acted. They laughed. Dad said that I was probably just having a nightmare and it was my first night in a new house. He promised that he and Mom would paint the room soon and that it would feel more like mine. The more we talked, the more I realized how silly I sounded. They were right. Of course it had all been a dream, but by the end, I was laughing too. That night I went to bed late. I was so tired. I fell asleep straight away, but then it happened again. I woke up paralyzed with fear and the ghost was heading towards me again. This time, it came up to me and pushed against my chest. I didn't know that ghosts could touch you, but this one did, and now I was even more terrified. I was struggling to breathe so much I thought I was going to suffocate. At some point, I must have passed out. The next day, I was so frightened I tried to tell my dad what happened, but he just shouted at me and told me that I needed to stop talking about ghosts. He said that we were all having to make sacrifices now, and I would just have to get used to the new house whether I liked it or not. But the next few nights, the ghosts kept appearing. I was so scared that I started avoiding sleep. I would stay up all night watching videos or listening to music with my headphones on. This meant that school was impossible. I kept falling asleep in class, teachers kept telling me off, and my grades got worse and worse. I was struggling to make any friends, so I had no one to talk to. Then one day, something really embarrassing happened. I was in math class when I must have drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, the class was silent. The teacher stood at the front of the class glaring at me, and all the other students turned and looked at me. When I opened my eyes and looked at them, the teacher burst into laughter, and so did all the class. I was mortified. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life. I got up, knocking over my chair in the process, and ran out of the class. I ran to the bathroom and went into a toilet stall, and I stayed there and sobbed my eyes out. But this didn't stop me from trying not to sleep at night. Some nights I couldn't help it. I was so exhausted I fell into a deep sleep and would wake up paralyzed with fear, with the ghost holding me down. But somehow I survived. I tried to get Mom alone to speak with her about it, but she told me she was too busy at work and that I would just have to learn how to sleep in the new house. Then, the scariest thing happened. One day I was at school in gym class where we were taking turns going up a climbing wall. I used to be really sporty and loved the gym, but now I was so tired all the time that I hated it. I put the helmet on and started to climb the wall. As I started to climb, I felt dizzy. But I somehow got to the top in record time. The gym teacher even clapped. But when it was time to climb back down, the room started to spin and I lost my grip. Then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed with a tube in my arm and hooked up to beeping machines. I called out for help and a nurse came into the room who got a doctor. She told me that my parents were on the way. She said I had passed out from exhaustion. She asked me what had happened and I burst into tears. I told her everything, how I had to move houses in school and leave all my friends and how I was in a new house that was haunted. I thought she would laugh at me as my parents did, but she didn't. Instead, the doctor listened intently and wrote everything down. I felt so relieved that she just listened to me. She kept asking me questions about what happens when the ghost is in the room and got me to describe how it made me feel. Then she said something that surprised me. She said that she believed me. She told me that she had to run some more tests first and hooked me up to some more machines. Then my parents turned up. I told them what had happened and they got angry. Dad told me off for fainting and told me that I needed to make sure that I look after myself. He said that he and Mom were working very hard to provide for me and they couldn't cope with this on top of everything. I was so shocked. I had fainted and my parents blamed me. Before we could get into an argument, the doctor came into the room and started to discuss things with my parents. She said that she had heard about the ghost I was seeing and had been investigating and believed me. I hadn't been making it up. My mom and dad looked so angry. She said I was suffering from something called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis causes you to wake up, but to be unable to move. She said that hallucinations were a side effect, and that was why I was seeing a ghost that was pushing against my chest. I was seeing it, but it wasn't really there. She told me that I would need to go on medication and make sure that I was leading a less stressful life. I glared at my parents. I couldn't believe that they hadn't believed me. That was 4 months ago, and now I feel much better. The sleep paralysis is happening less and less, and now that I know what it is, it feels a little less scary. Don't get me wrong, being paralyzed in bed is still pretty bad, but I can be calmer now that I know it will pass. I'm on medication that is helping a lot, and I'm making sure that I get a proper night's sleep, and I'm controlling my stress. School is a lot better now, too. I told the dean about my sleep paralysis, and now my teachers know, too. Now that they know I'm not just being lazy, they are a lot nicer to me. But what about my parents? Well, after finding out that I was suffering from sleep paralysis and realizing that stress may have caused it, things have been different. They just can't stop apologizing to me for not believing me. Mom kept bursting into tears as she felt so guilty, but I have forgiven them. I understand that they have had a tough time recently. They are both really tired from working such long hours just to keep a roof over our heads. A good thing to come out of this is that I am finally getting used to our new house. And now I know it isn't haunted, and I'm even starting to like it. I've been helping Mom and Dad decorate, and the room is starting to feel like my own. Looking back to when I thought my room was haunted, it seems so weird now, but at the time, it felt very serious. It kind of shows, though, that our worst fears can have the most logical explanations. I really hope that by sharing this story with you, that I have helped people to confront their own fears. Have you ever had a scary experience that turned out to be something logical? Let me know in the comments, and Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories like this.